This is Damian Macy, and I'm here interviewing for the Marshall Oral History Project, Deloris Maurer of Marshall. And we have with her today here in the meeting room of the library. And with that, I'll introduce Deloris and let her tell a little bit about her background and her life.
Yes, I'm Deloris Maurer, and I was born, I'm married, I did my schooling, and I still live around this area. In fact, I live right now only about 3 miles from where I was born, and not many people can say that fact. But I was born in 1937. At that time was called Dawson Prairie, but it is Clarksville, or lots of people call it Mill Creek today because of the boats and the lake we have. And my parents were Oscar Kirshner and Lucille Moorcraft Kirshner, and I had 6 other siblings. I only had one brother, John Kirshner. My oldest sister, Reba, is gone now. My only brother, John, is gone now. And my youngest sister, Connie, is gone. They all 3 passed with cancer over the years. But I do have a sister, Judy Rhodes, here in Marshall, a sister, Kay Williams at Clarksville, and a sister, Pearl Millette, that now lives in Las Vegas. But September next fall, she's moving to Marshall. So we're getting our family all together. Also with this, it said, when did you come to Marshall? I guess one of my first visits, I can remember coming to Marshall, I was probably 5 years old. And as I said, with 7 kids at that time, of course, there were only 4 older ones. But we came to town once a week, parked on the square across from the E&L, and we were all given quarters, and we went to the movies. And you still had money to go get a Coke, either E&L or Ratty Makers, which were both on the east side of the street. So that was my first coming to Marshall I can remember.
And that was coming from
Clarksville. Yes.
How long did it take you to get in from there? Do you recall?
Oh my gosh, fighting the dust and the ruts. I would say probably 30 minutes.
Okay.
And then, of course, later, 5 years after my sister Judy was born, there were 2 others born, and 5 years later, my youngest sister born. So we were kind of like triplet family, I guess. But it was enjoyable. And I would like to say the house that I was born in was only demolished 6 years ago. Jerry Forsythe bought the ground after my mother passed away, and he took down the old house. But the house just west of it is where one of my sisters live, and that's where my grandpa and grandma Kirshner, John and Reba Clapp Kirshner, lived. Also, our neighborhood. Well, I'm going to mention a few names. Used to be Mary Staub, Kay Staub, Don Staub, and Mary later became a Blag and taught in Marshall. And we just lost our neighbor Don Staub 5, maybe 6 years ago. Then to the west of us, we had Rosabelle Fox, who is now Rosabelle Walters. Right on the corner, as you go on the Clarksville Road, we had a Robinson family. Myrtle, Mildred, George, and Roy. And they were only in Clarksville probably 4 or 5 years. But then also we had the Sims family. And Phyllis Pancake, and the late Moni Reed, John's wife, she has passed away. But the younger Sims, Jack, lives right in Clarksville. He has a house there. But there weren't that many kids, but today I think there are fewer kids in the area than there ever has been. Also, our neighbors. Well, Joe Staub sold Mormon's Feed. And Bob and I still have part of a 4-place kitchen table setting of the old Melmac. Remember that? And I always think when I get those out, Joe Staub. And of course, Mary, as I say, we talk together, so we, still commute. Another memory, right between where we were raised, my grandpa and grandma lived, there's a creek, and Alan Walters lives near it right now. But we kids would go down there under the main road, of course no blacktops at the time, and it was cement fitted all the way around like a 6-foot square with a cement bottom in it. And in the wintertime, we thought we were professional ice skaters, and today couldn't stand up on them. Also, one of our neighbors, as I said, was the Fox family, and of course Rosabelle Walters still lives where her parents lived 70 years ago. But it's still a close-knit little family out there. And one of the things I still think about Clarksville, that's where I had my first piece of bologna and my first Coke. And with this, Emil Fox had the store, and he was the grandfather to Tony Murphy. And Tony now has gone. But with this, we were able to go over to the store. We had to take eggs over to sell them, in fact. And we weren't supposed to get the soda pop, but we got it. And, of course, Tony's sitting there on that bench. He said, "Take a big drink of it." I did. I think it came out my eyes, my ears. I mean, it was horrible. Lots of fizz to that. And, of course, we didn't have electricity. So if you had ice, you could get it cold. But, most of us drank it hot.
I'm glad you're talking about Clarksville, because I remember there being the store, and there was several homes. There was the blacksmith shop and several things. Could you just kind of tell a little bit about what was in Clarksville?
Okay, on the west end was the first person I remember ever having it was Emil Fox and his wife Ruth. Now they were the parents of, I've forgotten her first name. She married Bud Kroc, that had a grocery store down by the Kirshner Lumber Yard. Eileen. And then on the, I'd call it a city block, going east, Everett and Rose Clapp had a store. And one thing I've always loved about that, they had a cookie rack, but it isn't like what you find today. It was a stack of probably 16 boxes about a foot wide, and they were on an angled plank, and they had a glass window over them. And he always got the cookies from Holman and Terre Haute. That was one of the big packing places, commercial things. And they would bring them in by the dozens, like the sugar cookies here, the pecan cookies, the oatmeal cookies. And if you were good while you were in there with Mom and Dad, Everett and Rose would give you a cookie. So I always stood by the cookie place.
You looked hungry.
Oh yeah, I looked hungry, bagging eyes. And then the blacksmith shop was just across a little dirt alley, and it was owned by Wes Millhouse, and he was the dad to Barney Millhouse. And it was torn down probably 10, maybe 12 years ago. I don't know who was in charge of dismantling it, but they took a big piece of history out. That was the last one I knew around here. And then, of course, Wes and his wife lived in a big, huge brick house just across from it with the white picket fence. And, of course, that's been taken down now by, I would assume it'd probably be a great-grandson, and I won't mention his name. But it has just really changed. And then, as I say, there was one Baptist church, and it was to the east end as you come in from Marshall. And the new church was built probably 8, maybe 10 years ago. It might even be a little longer. And one of the first ministers I remember was Mr. Sparling. And I can't even tell you what his first name was. But we 4 older kids were always taken to church by our grandma and grandpa. My dad and mom didn't always go. You know, they had all these other little ones at home. So that's how I got to know, so many people. There were the Likens, the Hollingsworth, the Simses, the Foxes, the Buckners, Millhouses, and the Reillys. There was a Reilly family, and he was like a antique sheep herder because he lived the last little house. It's where I think Lloyd Claypool built the little white house. It's going quickly there. But he owned 40 acres over one road north, which is where we lived, and he always herded his cattle. Take them morning, walk them over, walk back, and walk in the evening, bring them back, because that time we had lots of boxes and things around, and you didn't have sheds. But I can always remember, it was not a regular cane people use today. And of course, Sam Reilly was kind of short, but that cane was taller than he was. I remember that.
A lot of people used a walking stick.
Yeah.
They didn't call
well,
it a cane.
no, it had a nook or a crook on it, but he was a good person too.
Was there a school also? There was a school somewhere in there, wasn't there?
Okay, between the 2 stores, it's fixed off like a city block. And to the north edge of that was the Clarksville School. And I attended 6 years there. And at the time, 1951, I came in, and I think that was the first year the new junior high was out here. And I'd gone from 1 or 3 or 6 in a class to 100. I mean, it was shocking. Well, where do all these people come from? But it was really a different kind of step. And that schoolhouse had what we called the east wing and the west wing, which were just 2 huge rooms. But the last teachers that taught there was Elizabeth Irving and Cecil Buckner, Russell Buckner's wife. Russell sold eggs out off the Clarksville Road. And Cecil was a sister to Jean Siverly that used to have a filling station down here. And it was Siverly, anyways, the family she was connected to. But I always thought that school would be there. But in 1956, I believe, was the final year for the school. And since that period of having the school there, we started having Clarksville school reunions about 12 years ago. And we started out probably with 100 to 125 in the year. But we're down to like 50 or 60. because the youngest student that would have gone there is now like 70, 71 years old. So, you know, our class meetings just get a little smaller, but I'm trying to think of her first name. It's not Edna. One of my grade school teachers, the 4th grade in fact, is still living now here at Hollybrook. Swartz, Edna Swartz. She was my 4th grade teacher. And the first year she came out to the reunion, she had written down everyone she had, like in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, ever went there she had, and gave that to me, and I've got it in a notebook. So, and she, you know, at that time she was thinking about how many were still surviving, because my sister Reba and my brother John were both deceased, and of course Morris Staub, Don's older brother, and different ones she knew that had passed away. She put P.A., passed away. And so I had that kind of a memory too. And one thing we always did was play softball. No one knew baseball at the time. But we had an older couple that just lived maybe a block and a half distance from the school to the, what's now the, I think it's a 1050th road. With all this stuff, they changed them. And when we would hit, or some of the guys would hit a ball, it would go out in their cow pasture. And we always had fun. Who got to climb over the fence and go get it? And finally, Felton Miller took where one big post was, and he put little pieces of wood, and he just really hammered them on both sides so we could climb right over that fence without tromping it down. And this Felton Miller, if I recall, his sister was Daisy Brainerd, Merle Brainerd's mom. And so, you know,
that's a familiar name out there.
And then, of course, Raymond Miller, who is passed now, but on the city police for, Felton would have been his uncle.
Okay.
So we've got, you know, a few things I can think about relating. Our family life. Well, today, you know, every child has to have a bedroom. Have you ever slept 4 in the same bed?
Oh my.
Reba, Judy, myself, and my brother John. We all 4 slept in, it was a big double bed. But the home place started out with a kitchen, a wash house attached to it where the washing machine was, 1 bedroom, which was Dad and Mom's, a living room, and 1 bedroom that came out to the south. And we decided in the wintertime it was warmer to all sleep together, but in the summer, go out and sleep on the cement porch. It was cooler. But after the other kids started coming along, Dad would enclose one side of the big porch, and then another one come along, he enclosed another one. And so the house ended up, I think, with 4 bedrooms by the time the whole family got there. But it was pretty crowded. And I mentioned the wash house. That was not the most pleasant place for you to be, because you had to carry water from the well, and we didn't always heat it to wash clothes. I can remember well. And the old kerosene washing machine. And it just cranked like on an old pull lawnmower and hope it kicked in. But that was something. Then in the, what I called the summer kitchen, where that was, lots of times they'd have shells, and Mom always had it canned and stuffed with food. And in the winter, all the guys out through there would get together and butcher, and instead of having deep freezes, they would spend a day or two, all the women, frying sausage cakes, hamburger cakes, tenderloin, sausage. Then they put it down in the crockery jars, then poured all that grease over it. And I can remember going down there in the wintertime, you always took a wooden spoon, and you'd pull all that fat back and take a container with you and pick out what you needed to take in and take that fat and put back over it. And I think of that today and I think, oh my goodness, how do we ever survive?
What if our health experts today
Yeah.
would go into orbit?
And if you stop and think, this area has been known for older people.
My grandfather and my grandmother, I don't think she could cook without lard.
No, or
I
make a
mean,
pie,
that was
no
just part
way.
of being Indian.
You had to have that old lard to make your pie crust.
And they were good.
Oh, delicious things. I was thinking about the wash house. They also had what they called the summer kitchen, and that's where they hung the meat in the winter. And I could still smell when you went in there. They had like a brick thing, fire pit, I guess you'd call it today. And they would make their fire in there, and they always used hickory, and would cure the hams and the bacons. And I can still picture these big old metal hooks hanging, and here you'd have all the sausage, looked like a jump rope or a hose hanging up there. But again, you just went out and got what you needed for a meal, and being it was smoked,
In your wash house
preserved it.
next to the washing machine, you had a fancy dryer too, didn't you?
Oh my, that clothesline got cold in the winter. Or something I can remember though with, no convenience. Our front room, what we called the living room, of course had the wood stove in it. But I can remember Dad driving nails from one bedroom door over here to the bedroom door, to the kitchen door, over to the big kitchen window, and you just kind of walk through those. And you see
That
these.
added humidity to the house as they
Oh,
dried
yeah,
too,
it
didn't
never got too hot. But, we didn't have that. But I know I was probably a sophomore in 52. No, had to be, 50, the fall of 52 and spring of 53. We got what was called a Delco plant. Now that was a toy. You had to carry all this water and fill these big square containers. And I remember the wires sticking down there, and Dad said, don't you ever touch those wires, because, with that water, you could get electrocuted. And my sister Judy's always been a daredevil. And I can just picture her, but instead of sticking her finger in, she'd stick a twig in there or something. Of course, it didn't do anything, but she never did stick her finger in it, but she just wanted to see if it could curl something. And our fun was early after we'd eat a meal, we'd walk down to the Sob's house, and especially Kay and Mary would walk back with us, and then Nyla Reynolds, she used to be Nyla Reilly, her husband passed away a few years back, lived on a little side road, she and her family, and walking on to the west to the Robinsons and Foxes and all up and down the road there. And our pastime was just talking and visiting. We didn't have TVs, radios, computers, all these little tidbit things to play with. But I really think to this day, when you see these people and think, my gosh, we learned how to talk. You didn't tweet someone or something. I'm so afraid people are going to not end up sending cards, letters, notes. They don't talk to you on the telephone. You get all these messages, which I have not played into. I do not have a digital phone, and when I quit teaching, I gave up all computer life.
Really?
So we have nothing of that.
Well, Doris, when you finished school here in Marshall, you obviously went on to higher education.
I went to Eastern Illinois University for 4 years, and that was a long 4 years because Fred Huffington was the superintendent of Clark County schools, not just Marshall, and I got one of the 5 scholarships given, and it paid my tuition, my books, my student union fees. All our family had to worry about was either how you drove to Charleston or how you could find a place to live. And of course, as I say, we had one car and an old pickup. So Dad thought it might be less expensive to live there. And the house is still on North 6th Street in Charleston, just about a block north of Old Main. And I stayed there for 1.5 years. And then Bob, my husband, at the time wasn't, but he found out he was going to be shipped overseas in service. And he came home, I think it was my birthday in November, the last of November, and he offered me an engagement ring, which I took. And would you believe, he found out he was being shipped the 3rd of January. So we got married on Christmas Eve.
You just had an anniversary.
Yes, 58. But anyway, when we got married, Burdell Hill from Martinsville was a minister, and he came right to my folks' house, and the west wall and part of the south wall was made of knotty pine, which I don't even think they use anymore, but it had beautiful grains in it, you know. And Mom and Dad had one of these pre-built fireplaces they always put up in the winter, more to make it pretty than to be helpful. And they had poinsettia on either end of it, the tree decorated. So we did not have any wedding expenses, nothing at all. And for our marriage, my mom and dad, Bob's mom and dad, gave us $50, and we stayed at what was at that time the Paris Hotel, just off the east side there, about a block. And for $50, we had a room, we ate out, and got back so I could start to school, and he was shipped out. Excuse me. And so it was kind of a short honeymoon, but I went back, and I stayed in the same place to finish my sophomore year. My junior year, Grandma Reba Kirshner got pretty sick. And that time, John and my older sister, Reba, had already scooted out. And Judy, at that time, had just started her first year up at Purdue. So she couldn't help, and the other kids were a little younger. I stayed with my Grandma Kirshner my junior year while Bob was overseas. And when I finished my junior year, she gave me a car. It was an old Plymouth. So I was on top of the world. And I found out then that Bob was coming home in June of 1955, or no, 59. And I was to graduate in May. So I checked with them to see if I couldn't wait till July to go through, or, get my certificate and everything. They said, oh, that's fine. Well, would you believe in July when they were going to give the others out, Bob had to go to boot camp in Michigan. So he didn't even get my college graduation. So we had, it was just kind of one of those lives that you didn't know what each day was bringing. But when he got home then, we lived at the suburb of Clarksville, I'll call it. As you're coming in from the east, the dip, there was an old brick half-wood house there where Bob Gard lives now. And we lived in it for 2 years. And then I was hired to teach in the fall of 1960. And Charles Bush was the superintendent. And I got hired that summer, and about the time school was I found out that I was pregnant. And of course, at that time, you didn't, I shouldn't say this, but you did not go to school and teach and lay the baby on the table for all the kids. Now, that was Mr. Bush's words. A mother's place is to be at home. You don't take your baby and show all the students. And I can still hear him telling me that. So I did not teach in the fall of 1960, but George came along in the following March, healthy kid, and I decided then to maybe go back to work, and I did. Would you believe I taught 1 year, and our second son was born. At that time then, Mr. Bush called, we got another opening up here at the Old North School, and I took it, worked there 1 year, and our third son was born. And Mr. Bush told me, he said, I think you've got a pattern going. I said, no, this is the last one. So I taught lots of years, and then finally, 8 years